Welcome back to the Magic Kathy Show, Michael. I am so excited to have you on and really couldn't think of anyone better to talk about Saturn in Pisces than you, just because you have so much insights on psychology, dream world, the dream energy, and what time is an illusion and all of these things, which feels very Piscean, Neptunian, Jungian, symbolism, all of the good things we talked about in our last episode, which I will link down below. But yeah, today I really feel called to talk about Saturn and Pisces because it's a big deal. So welcome back to the show. For those of us who have not heard the first episode or might not even know you, give us a little bit of your background.
I'm Dr. Michael Lennox, but call me Michael. But I like to say Dr. Michael Lennox because I call myself a spiritual teacher, astrologer, a psychologist, and expert in dreams and dream interpretation. I started being curious about my own dreams as a teenager. By the time I was 17 or 18, I had my first deck of tarot cards. And then in the middle of my 30s, I was just craving a life where I was fully engaged in the spiritual sensibilities that attracted me in my teenage years and in my 20s. And I just went to grad school to start a master's and a doctorate in psychology, not really knowing what I would do with it. But there I was at around 40, 38, 39, 40 years old, about 20, 25 years ago, ready to begin this life that included astrology, dreams, psychology, and I've just done a lot of things in those realms in teaching and presenting astrology to people on a daily basis to help them use astrology as a tool to contextualize their lives. It's one of the best tools there is.
And even your intro seems very Piscean, it's like the universe, the cosmic force, the greater power really took you, and you didn't really know why you would study all of these things. I was just interested for some reason, and now here you are later doing the magic that you do, and it's like, oh, everything just prepared me for that, right?
That is absolutely true. In fact, I'll share this with you. I don't know why this idea just popped into my head, but all I ever wanted to be as a kid was an actor. And from the time I was 8 years old, so when I went to college, I chose a school in the United States that back in the 80s was excellent for theater training. SUNY Purchase, a lot of famous people came out of Purchase in the 80s. The training was exemplary. Speech, voice, the body, and I was trained as an actor. But I got to tell you something. When I sit in my body today at 59 years old, I think of those 4 years of training as preparing me to be a person in a body managing energy at a crazy level, that the openness that I enjoy in my instrument through my practice, that openness started with my acting training, where I learned how to breathe and move my body and get in touch with this little thing. And I call my little moniker for my business is your ambassador to conscious embodiment, because the body is the only aspect of who we are that's present in the now. Our mind can take us behind and forward, but the body doesn't lie. The body carries all our memory, and it's the only aspect of self that's present in the now moment. And that was one of those crazy things of, I thought I was studying to be on the stage, but I was really studying to just be in my body in a more sophisticated and powerful way.
I love that though, because it kind of, it brings many things into even our conversation today. It's, through acting, we hear that in a manifestation world was act as if, so acting almost prepares you to manifest or to activate the timeline where you are already that person, and it kind of shifts your vibration and anchors that energy, the dream essentially that you had. I want to be an actor, I want to be on stage, I want to speak. Well, that was just a dangling carrot of your soul essence, letting you know that it's important for you to practice all of that and to become that embodiment piece. And actually it also ties into the North Node being in Taurus for that ingress chart that we have for the Saturn moving into Pisces. And you just mentioned, and again, that brings me into time is an illusion, that you are 59. So Where's your Saturn at? Is it in Aquarius or is it in
It
Pisces?
is, honey. I had my second Saturn
Yeah, it
return
was me.
last year. Yes,
Wow.
my Saturn is at 18 degrees of Aquarius. And so I had my 3 hits of my Saturn return were in the calendar year of 2022. And let me tell you something, it was brutal. And I thought it was going to be easier because of a lifetime of being consciously aware of my
But not if we
karmic
have
contract.
so many squares at the same time.
Nothing, yeah, nothing can keep any human being
No.
from bumping into Saturn and his demands, which is the topic of our conversation today, is what will be demanded of us when Saturn changes signs. And something that's interesting for me about talking about my day's training as an actor, one of the things that's done, why we do the training for an actor to get comfortable with the body, comfortable with the voice and breath, is you want to train an actor to appreciate that the unconscious will tell you what it wants or what it needs by itself. If you make space for it as an actor, you will be surprised by impulses that show up because the unconscious is playing with you. Well, that's a way to live a good, conscious life as a human being. Forget about acting. What we want to do with life is appreciate that sometimes we're going to bump into something, make an error, have a fight, learn a lesson, and that's an unconscious impulse rising up and wrestling us to the ground. And when we are more open to that process without fighting it, without resisting the mistakes we make, without crumbling under the lessons we have to learn, our unconscious will teach us what the lesson is in any given moment. And Saturn is about to move into the sign of the zodiac that invented the unconscious, Pisces.
Yes, and actually I want to bring the Ingress chart into our conversation because of many things, actually. I mean, yeah, just looking at it, it's interesting because it is a full moon, right? When we have Saturn moving into Pisces, and obviously that means it's going to be an intense journey and an intense ride. And then Mercury is into that whole conversation too. So how do you feel about that? And I want to also fill you in on, I want to look back at Saturn in Virgo and Saturn in Pisces the last time in a second, just because it's cosmic poetry, as I always like to say, how that story has been building up since 1993.
Well, I'm delighted that you're showing the chart because that just gives me an opportunity to sort of read and extemporaneate from what I see. First of all, the fact that it is a full moon does make it a very amplified ingress for sure, but it's also the Virgo full moon. It's the Pisces Virgo trajectory
polarity,
that's ripping open the fabric of consciousness at that moment with the full moon when Saturn steps in. So that, first of all, it's like a trumpet heralding, you know, get to work, on the unconscious. What happens in every Virgo full moon, or even in every Pisces full moon when the sun is in Virgo and the moon is in Pisces? Pisces and Virgo is the trajectory of spirit and flesh. The body was invented by Virgo. The spirit was driven by Pisces. And in that polarity of opposites, we have the experience of that trope of we are, what is it, spiritual beings having a human experience.
And I actually want to bring into that whole thing, you know, that it's even with Pluto moving into Aquarius and everything, that whole shadow of Virgo and that intense feeling that so many of us have of abandonment, of we are not good enough. And that's why we have been sent to this earth plane that is fucking awful, right? And we have to suffer, which is actually not true because the earth can be paradise. We just have to shift our perspective and move out of that, you know, age of Pisces victim state and loss and abandonment from source. And that's, I think, a really, really big opportunity for us to step into what I see here with, you know, Chiron and Aries, Venus and Jupiter in Aries. It's like finding our spark and joy for us being that cosmic child, really.
So what Saturn is also going to always ask of us is moderation and balance in all things. He's the wisdom bringer. And so what you just pointed out is an interesting full moon where the conscious awareness portion of the full moon is Pisces, which means we are aware of the unconscious processes, the oneness, the sort of pre-form energy that Pisces is, while at the same time, Jupiter, Venus, and Chiron are fired up in Aries. What is Saturn entering Pisces going to say to that contradiction? It's going to say you have to be big enough to contain both the inner, softer pre-experience of the Pisces energy without getting lost or falling into the hole of no body, no form, no, I don't know who I am or where I'm going, while also honoring the fire of Aries, but not getting so blown up by fire that you miss all of the water. It's a fire-water moment to have all of that Pisces and all of that Aries, but we want to make the fire in the water bubble. We want them to mix, well, so that the fire doesn't burn, doesn't burn away the water, and the water doesn't put out the fire. Yeah. So that's one of the things that Saturn in Pisces is going to demand of us, is that we honor the unconscious first and primary, but we don't lose the outside world either. And this full moon is a little bit of a setup for that, because it's giving us both watery softness with fiery thrust. And then Saturn entering at that moment is like, here's what I'm talking about, kids. Here's the lesson.
I love that. And I also think it is a huge opportunity for us to, I want to say, we see Saturn and Pluto both at master degree points, 29 degrees in Capricorn for Pluto, and then 0 degrees obviously for Saturn in Pisces, which brings us kind of back to that whole like Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And actually I wanted to touch on the chart. Which one was it? It was, let me double check. Yeah, the last time Saturn was in Pisces, we had this interesting alignment, or moved into Pisces.
Wow.
Yes, exactly. Where we had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. I saw it and I was like, oh, cosmic poetry again, right? And also a huge emphasis on that on that Taurus and Scorpio axis, which is interesting because that's been illuminated for us right now, right, with the South Node and the North Node. So how do you feel? Is that a story that has been playing out since, and again, actually Venus is at the same degree point, almost 16. Well,
what we have in a full rotation of Saturn in Pisces in 93 and Saturn in Pisces in 2003, is one entire Saturn sort of, a cycle where it started in 93. What's interesting to me about 93 was about when I was beginning to study astrology.
Oh, I mean, that was when I was born. So,
well, and so when I think of that 30 years, I think of, well, that's when I started the earnest path of being more interested in the inner world than the outer world, if you will. I mean, I don't mean that quite literally, but that is, of course, what
it's kind
Saturn
of like
Pisces is saying is,
and it is kind of that, on that Saturn-Pluto conjunction point for you in a personal level, it was that breakthrough in your spiritual evolution, in the structure of how you see reality, right?
Yes. And so we come full circle 30 years later, and then there's this other sort of social and outer planet magnificence, where in Pisces, in Saturn in Pisces in 93, it was the wake-up planet. This is when you were born. This is your generation, honey. You're the generation.
I'm 92, but yes,
But you're the generation that has built into you that spirituality and waking up is the same thing. Your guys are a generation that can bring a kind of peace for humanity in a way that my generation is only hinting at. You guys gotta take over. When
you gotta do it.
And it really woke up here. Then if you then think about, well, what's happening in this Saturn in Pisces moment, the real powerful story is about the relationship between Saturn and Pluto, who came together at a moment that rocked and changed the world utterly, January 2020. So here's what's important about that. Let's talk about what's coming up with this full moon, Saturn into Pisces at the end of the month. 2 weeks later, Pluto moves into Aquarius. By the way, this is making the month of March like, holy shit.
It's a fucking firehouse. I don't even know what to say.
Crazy. I can't even imagine what's going to happen in the outside world.
Me neither. When I prepared 2023, I was like, actually, we just have to survive March.
There's some truth to that. So when we were getting close to 2020 in 2019, I was looking, and all of us were, all astrologers were looking at January of 2020 as being radical. The language I had was changes like you've never seen before. And then if someone would push back and say, what do you mean by that? I'd be like, I don't know, like you've never seen before.
Like your wildest dreams could not even imagine, you know?
Well, and that's what I said. And I can tell you that in January of 2020, I have a pal who's an astrologer, and Monique would call me up or I'd call her up. Every day something else would happen in January of 2020, cackling. Like, oh my God, global pandemic. Oh my God. Oh my God. So that change on the planet can be understood even by people who are not adept at astrology. This is very simple. Pluto is the planet of death and rebirth, change at the level of all the way down to molecular and back up again so that the change is utter and complete. That's Pluto. Saturn is the reckoning, the I must attend to what's important at a high level. So together, there was just no way that the planet wasn't going to radically alter, and it did. What has happened since then is that Saturn has moved exactly 30 degrees. And in March of 2023, Saturn has now moved far enough away that they are holding what's called a semi-sextile, a 30-degree angle. So here's what happens. Here's why 30 degrees is important. Well, here's why it's not important. If you've never heard of the semi-sextile, it's because it's such a weak geometry. It's not talked about a lot because it can't generate events. It's an angle that implies that two planets are just far enough away from each other to operate independently once again.
Which makes sense because it's like, one zodiac also covers 30 degrees. Yeah,
that's what it is. It is.
And then it's a vibrational shift.
Because the vibration of 30 degrees is the separation of sign to sign. So it's like this. If Saturn is our teacher, and this teacher and the transformer met in January of 2020, the teacher would have been overwhelmed by the process of transformation and kind of not great at teaching. This is me being...
It's like the teacher is like, there's so much to cover.
That's right. Overwhelmed, overwhelmed with the changes of the planet, things going crazy. And it's like, now that he's 30 degrees away, the teacher can start teaching again. Means the overwhelming changes are in the past, maybe 35 seconds in the past, but we are now in the new landscape. It has been in formation for the last 3 years, and Saturn changing sign says for the next 2.5 years, we've got to focus on the inner experience of every individual on the planet. Pisces means your insides, your unconscious, your dream state, the behind the scenes, the unconscious experience. Because now we can start getting to work because we're not having to work on, oh my God, the world is changing. It's like, well, now that the world is changing, who am I going to be? And I think that's a lot of Saturn in Pisces is helping us all work on the insides of our psyches so that we can meet the world and bring it what it needs now that it has changed so dramatically.
Yeah, and I mean, one word that I always have for Saturn, which not everyone likes, but it also has, has a positive quote unquote side to it. It's responsibility, but responsibility always comes power. And I feel like that that move from Saturn through Aquarius also brought up the responsibility that we have for our own trauma, because I see Aquarius has, these trauma imprints that lead us to the future and lead us to evolution in the highest degree point. So we all kind of cleared up our shit over the last years, especially with that South Node in Scorpio. And now it's about, okay, and how can I have responsibility or take responsibility and also power for my own soul essence in this embodied form on a day-to-day basis, which is that Pisces Virgo polarity, which then also ties in together our responsibility for the collective and our power for the collective when Pluto, which is power, moves into Aquarius. So it's actually it can be a beautiful opportunity, but obviously we have to talk about both sides that are going to probably manifest, because not everyone has these insights and is receptive to that truth. Essentially, it's that there's also this, oh God, I feel so lost in this world that has no structure as I know it, and I feel like I need to escape off the earth plane. And we definitely obviously have to speak about also Saturn moving into Pisces will bring up all of the polarities, which is everything around diseases, illness, escapism, addictions, everything where we are trying to run away from our responsibility, essentially.
You're absolutely right. Saturn is the responsibility guy. That's a perfect moniker for him. And in Pisces, the shadow with Pisces would be to get lost, to drop into nowhere, to avoid, to hide out, to be so confused by the changing world that you diminish yourself inside of it. And of course, what we all need to be doing over the next 2.5 years with Saturn in Pisces is taking responsibility for what is on our insides, what our internal experience is, because then in a few years, Saturn will move into Aries, where the responsibility will be about taking action out into the world. And this becomes the time of preparation, so that we use the Saturn in Pisces energy to check in our inner worlds, to have it in alignment too, as you said, on a daily basis, be remembering the power of being connected to the collective, connected to spirit through Pisces, without getting lost in it or hiding from the world by avoiding responsibility.
And, I mean, the ingress chart already tells us how we can actually do that, which is always beautiful when we look at astrology, because we see that, Mercury is in Pisces, so there's definitely brain fog. There's definitely like the mind will have these crazy stories and maybe illusions and everything. But then also there is Mars in Gemini, which can be an opportunity for us to just completely follow a different route in the mind and change our perspective about things. And actually, we are just being asked to go into the body and to go into what we really sense and not get lost in the mind. That's really what I see with that. But again, not everyone will see that they are not their thoughts, that's all just an illusion.
I love what you just dialed up looking at this chart. And what it reminds me to sort of add to the mix is that Mars in Gemini wants us to make sure we are aware of how we're choosing to perceive our world, right? We get to choose what we perceive. And the moon in this ingress chart is in the 3rd house, Gemini's house, which means it's a full moon about right perception. And so Saturn moving into Pisces, and if I think about that ingress of the responsibility due the teacher moving into the inner world of Pisces, when the moon in the 3rd house of the ingress chart and Mars in the sign of perception, Gemini, that part of what Saturn in Pisces message will be is work on your perception so that you're not seeing the world as a dangerous, hateful place that will destroy you, but that you're seeing the world as a place that needs love, compassion, and forgiveness. And what do you have to know about your insides in order for you to bring love, compassion, and forgiveness, the Piscean qualities, to the world? And if you perceive the world as dangerous, or even worse, not worth the effort.
Yeah, and it's about also, there's a square between Mars and the moon, on that full moon. So it's like, okay, you know, if you believe the stories in your mind about why you feel this way,
Right.
ask yourself if it's just like some old childhood imprint, which still Chiron and Aries, and not even past the first degree, or like the first half of the Aries energy. So it's still like very young, where we heal our wounds and take our power back. And there is an opportunity, obviously, for us to, Saturn also means maturity, to mature in our soul experience here in this body. But there's also obviously always the risk, I want to say, to just blindly believe the programming that we've adopted in childhood and continue with it for the rest of our lives, instead of creating a new dream. And as you started the podcast with it, it's about becoming a new role for your life, and not being so in your box, not being so that one persona that is just imprinted and coded, and you're not able to shift out of that. You can be whoever you want to be. You can design your new avatar tomorrow in your dream, and you wake up in a new dimension, a new reality, right? That's the highest expression also of that understanding, that there are infinite timelines, so to speak, to choose from, and you can just choose from a catalog. Who do I want to be today?
Beautiful. Beautiful language.
Yeah.
You know, speaking of dreams, one of the things that will be true when Saturn moves into Pisces is that dream work will rise up as a even more powerful tool for lessons learning and integration, because Pisces is the sign that invented dreaming. So I love the idea that the demand from the teacher will be, rely on your subtle energies, rely on your dreams, rely on your unconscious speaking to you. So anybody who's listening who's an avid dreamer, get your dream journal ready and dive into dream work during this season of Saturn in the sign of dreaming.
Do you see then also that there could be a risk, I definitely see that, of people being also shocked and I want to say get lost in not knowing what the real reality will be? Because I feel like with, Saturn in Pisces also feels like Pisces is the final sign, and it dissolves everything, and Neptune is also there, so there's a lot of dissolving, and then it's a full moon, so there's a lot of just releasing. So I feel like the soil behind beyond our feet might be like just gone, and we feel like this is not even real, nothing is real. What is even reality? What is time? And people will just flow around in the air or in space and feel completely out of whack.
I think that one of the challenges on the planet in general is that you have a lot of people who have woken up to see the world in a certain way. It's so much so that there's, here in the United States, you've got a whole faction of people who use the term woke as derision. Like as if that's a bad thing, to wake up to that all human beings on the planet deserve care. I don't think that's I don't think that's something to be decried. I think that is natural and organic.
Exactly.
And so if there's an unconsciousness about people, and now I'm not talking about aficionados of astrology, I'm talking about people who are preferring to stay asleep, people who are preferring not to see the world as a unified whole of a diverse people that want to live in a homogeneous piece. Saturn in Pisces is going to increase the myopic unconsciousness of people who are trying to hold the old guard in place. Once, we are in the age of Aquarius, but we are in the beginning inches of it. And it may take us 2,000 years to get it right. So these generations are the most disruptible as the age changes. And it's interesting that as Pluto moves into Aquarius, he kind of signals a kind of earnest beginning. It's not the beginning of the age. I think we've been in the age for a while. And there is no demarcation of here's when the age starts. It's just a smattering of astrological and world events that mark the age. But certainly Pluto moving into Aquarius says, huzzah, no turning back, the age has begun. But the age we're coming out of allowed a lot of unconsciousness to be on the planet. That's the age of Pisces. That's why the last 2,000 years was able to create a world that grew faster than consciousness could keep up with. This is everything from the Industrial Revolution and colonization of the planet to modern technology explosion, which is going faster than we can handle. That's a Piscean thing. So part of what the age of Aquarius will do for us is allow the human organism to rise up to the technology and the speed and the shifts and changes that are happening on the planet. But in this incipient moment, it's interesting to me that the planet of change is saying, huzzah, we're in the new age. And the planet of responsibility is saying, clean up your unconscious blindness over the next 2.5 years so that you can meet the age of Aquarius with gusto. And then when Saturn moves into Aries in 2.5 years, it's like, okay, now you're ready to activate.
I love that so much, especially because this morning I just saw this reel of one of my favorite also teachers, and it was all about how awareness is born out of ignorance.
Yes.
And that kind of reminds me of, we've been in that unconscious age of Pisces fog, where we were waiting for a savior outside in whatever way, right? And have been lost in that state of, oh, that's how life on this planet has to be, and no one will ever come to save us, is like the final end conclusion that we have now. It's like, okay, and what do we do now? Because we saw that
we have to save ourselves.
Yes. Oh, that's an interesting point of awareness, right? That we gained out of all of that. And it's exactly as you said, we have to see that that's the only way to actually step into that age of Aquarius, which is, independence, it's freedom, it's the future, it's humanity, it's the collective, and that we all play an individual part and our own role, so to speak, right? Bringing back the acting in the cosmic web. And it can be beautiful if we don't get lost in, we have to fit in, we have to fit into the system. That's not even, then we're not able to even express anything that we came up here to do. And obviously, us as astrologers, we know about soul contracts, we know about, what is the point of your energy even being in this physical body. Are you actually living that? And I feel like with Saturn in Pisces also, that comes more to the forefront, like, can you look at your chart? Can you look at your energy? Can you look at why you even came here? And can you just do it, I
love that. Yeah, exactly. Because if we don't save ourselves, as you well pointed out, ain't nobody or anything coming to save us.
Yeah. And how do you feel like people, or like, why do you feel people will work more with the dream world? And maybe even, I don't know the astrology of when Carl Jung did all of his work and everything, but I'm pretty sure there's a connection. How do you feel like, I have my theory, it will all be about diseases and things that are happening to our physical body if we're out of alignment, that no doctor can really explain. And so we have to really also on that level dive into our own instrument, which is the body, and investigate and learn and really connect to every single tissue and cell, everything that is unseen, so to speak, right? And connect to that and reprogram that. So I feel like there's a huge opportunity for us to actually learn more about the body, which is also North Node in Taurus. But it will come through, the outside world won't have answers for us.
First of all, I think your language is good. Like, I love the way you language your visionary thoughts.
Thank you.
Well, it's not something that I do a lot with astrology, and
Yeah.
I always appreciate when somebody will speak into such things and do so with some discernment without being alarmist or creepy about it, right?
Oh.
It is accurate that with Saturn in Pisces, outside world is going to give very few answers. Inside world is where they all are. It might even be that there are answers that will come later when Saturn gets out of Pisces that won't be available to coalesce into knowledge and wisdom because it'll take a few years to figure things out while Saturn is in a sign that says the outside world can't receive or help, you know. When it comes to the question that you asked me about, like, how do I envision or imagine that dream work will suddenly rise up? What strikes me to say to you is what I experienced as someone who worked in the world of dreams, dreaming, and dream interpretation when Neptune moved into Pisces in 2011. Because I had already been up and running in my work and my career. In 2003, I was on a television show on the Sci-Fi Network about dreams and dream interpretation that did not take. The world just wasn't interested enough. The show wasn't organic enough to take. And then I was like trying to create my career after the show folded in 2003 by doing workshops and working on my first book that eventually did come out. But here's something. Workshops weren't readily happening. When I got them to happen, the interest in dreams was very, well, at the time it was what I knew of people's interest in dreams. I was working on a book, but I couldn't find an agent to sell it. And then all of a sudden in 2011, Neptune, the planet that rules Pisces and dreaming, moved into Neptune. And all of a sudden, I get a book deal. I do workshops and they're full. I do another and another. And now people are coming to events and they're asking interesting, deep questions about dream and dream interpretation. Whereas before 2011, the whole experience was sort of meh. And suddenly it got rich and juicy, in my experience at any rate, of the readiness for the world to be interested in dreams, certainly the readiness for my work in dreams. And maybe this is all just personal to me, and because I'm an astrologer and a dream interpreter, that the two things coalesce. So when I think about Saturn moving into Pisces, I think about Neptune's ingress in 2011, deepening spiritual connection around the planet.
Of course. I mean, everyone talks about 2012, you know. So you're spot on with that energy. It's like all of a sudden people woke up one day and were like, dreams.
That's right. That's right. There were crises that led to spiritual awakenings. You had my experience of more people interested. It became much more daily to bump into people who were on a path when Neptune moved into this sign, because we are not separate from the planetary movement. So the same thing will happen organically when the planet of wisdom, teaching, and responsibility moves into that same territory that is most activatable and touchable in our dream state. So when we are awake, Pisces is the part of us that is not seeable, knowable, touchable, or experienceable, except through interpreting unconscious impulses. And then we go to sleep, our conscious mind goes to sleep with us, and suddenly our Piscean energy rises up for us fully because we're in the dream state. So how could we not have some shift in our dream state with the planet of wisdom, responsibility, and teaching entering that room?
That's very accurate. And would you then also say that we might now have more clarity, structure, understanding of what our personal assignment, maybe even for or around the spiritual awakening that really kickstarted in 2012 as well, really is? So even when you said, you know, you look back now and you realize, oh, then all of a sudden in 2012 or like 2011, my work got an anchor or got, more, more exposure and everything. So for everyone who's listening, maybe also reflecting back on what was happening around 2012 and how is that maybe a topic that comes back around now, and that might be a message or something that leads you towards the future or helps you through that ingress even.
I think that's a very hopeful sort of thing to sort of say about the possibility that people will, in fact, there'll be a demand to rise up to the most wisdom that you can possibly contain in your humanity, but through spiritual connection, behind the scenes interventions, dream work, and because that's where Saturn will say the hard work is being done. It's being done in the invisible. And so when we are empowered to work with our invisible, it is a preparation for movement into the world. Just as when we go to sleep and dream, one of the things that the brain is doing is clearing off metabolic waste and processing experiences so that we can wake up the next day and go out into the world.
True.
So Saturn in Pisces for 2.5 years is like a sleep where we work on the inside so that we can go out into the world when Saturn reaches Aries. And so from that perspective, I love your hopefulness that Saturn in Pisces will allow lots of people to turn within, find who they are in that inner way that isn't about form or structure in the outside world, but the unshakable inner sense of, I know who I am, and then move from there. That's a process that I think Saturn in Pisces can help generate, though it might be a little scary because in unknown places and empty spaces in our psyche are scary.
Yeah. And wherever we have resistance and are not ready to dissolve all of these past imprints, I feel like, again, that's when the physical body will show it up.
That's
and
right.
That can be like a little bit of like a rocket, like hurdle, I think, for the next, especially because health has been on the forefront of everyone's mind anyways. So that will be interesting. I actually also want to bring into the conversation just briefly 2007 with Saturn in the opposite sign, which was obviously Virgo, and there was a lot of Virgo energy. And interestingly enough, we had Uranus right where we have the full moon happening for this ingress chart. So spiritual breakthrough, obviously, also another point was 2007, and for everyone might be able to reflect back on what happened in 2007. And we also just had a full moon actually at 16-17 degrees of Leo. So there's a lot of similar energetic imprints, I want to say, where we all are being activated, and Saturn is right now, or was, where Neptune is. So how do you see the connection between 1993, 2007, and then obviously now? I know it's a lot of charts, but
well, it's a lot without like sort of preparation.
You don't need to prepare. I know that it flows through you.
Well, what I love about the whole conversation about the body, which I think is very interesting, that with Saturn in Pisces, that the body expresses the sort of polarity expression, and then Saturn in Virgo would have expressed the polarity of a Piscean connection,
especially with the North Node right here.
Yeah, you got the North Node and Uranus, right? So Uranus was saying at this moment of the ingress, so I love that you're doing ingress charts. This is great. So at the moment of the ingress, as Saturn is saying, I am here to work on, through, with, and as the body. Virgo is all about the physical body, the details, the embodiment of your life. That's a whole Virgo thing. Then Uranus, the awakener, says and reminds us, yeah, but I'm over here in the land of spirit. So if you don't capitulate to spiritual connection, Saturn and Virgo, your embodiment won't be worthy of anything, because if you don't fill that body with spirit, then what's the point? And then we've got Uranus now in Taurus, so that if the ingress chart of Saturn into Pisces says that the work is within, then Uranus in Taurus says, yes, go within, because I'm right here putting our awakening in the land of form. But if you're not full up on the insides, if your inner cup is not full, then Uranus in Taurus is just going to make your life fall apart.
Yeah.
Because that's what Uranus does. All that instability in Taurus says even things you thought couldn't be moved and shaken can be moved and shaken with Uranus and Taurus. We're seeing evidence of that in these years of tumultuous change on the planet. But that's the message of Uranus right now is, yes, listen to Saturn, go within and fill your cup, because then as we change the world on the outside, you want to have that full cup. Whereas in 2007, he was saying, make sure that as you work on your embodiment and the details of your life, Saturn in Virgo, that you're making sure that you understand if that body isn't receptive to spiritual energy flowing through it, then you're not going to be operating as whole, integrated, powerful human beings.
Absolutely. I love that so much. It's so true, because we need to really take care of that vessel. And interestingly enough, right here too, we see that actually Mercury and Mars are, again, Mars is in Gemini, but Mercury is also in the sign where Saturn moves into. So it's always kind of connected to our thoughts.
That's interesting. Mars
so
in
interesting.
Gemini again at an ingress.
And that's not, and also the sun being in the sign that Saturn moves into, which is also not always the case. So it's kind of interesting.
No, that is interesting. I love those synchronistic linings up. So then if I vibe with the idea that we're looking at Saturn in Virgo and then Saturn in Pisces, which is important to understand, embodying spirit.
Yeah.
That in both ingress moments, the planet that rules the body is saying, I'm available to change perceptions, Gemini.
Yeah.
And this is where the twin analogy sort of comes in. It's like one twin is like, I'm down for the work, and the other twin is like, I ain't doing it,
Yeah. And it's also, even when you think of the mind, there's always this, I want to say demonic voice and the angelic voice, where it's like the good and the bad wolf. So, and who do you follow?
That's right. Who do you follow? Who do you follow? It's a wonderful analogy anytime I'm trying to make a point and any planet is in Gemini. It's like, okay, who do you follow?
Yeah.
And in both of these ingresses, who do you follow? Which twin?
Which twin? And it's also, it brings us to that Pisces Virgo polarity on a day-to-day basis. Every morning, maybe sitting in meditation, listening to the body, instead of instantly jumping into, now I'm listening to the outside world. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe they have the answer for us, or they know better, but actually only you will find your own power inside of yourself, inside of the body, inside of your spiritual connection, inside of your own interpretation for dreams. Even, yes, we can have guides and we can have people that help us, but again, it's not about a savior outside. It's just about someone like you or like me that helps us remember our truth.
Who you are on the inside. Absolutely right.
I think that wraps it up perfectly. I don't know if you want to add anything else.
I'll add one thing just about the landscape of the year itself.
Oh yeah, that's
beautiful. And just point out, there's only one transit that hits 3 times this year, and it is a semi-square between Saturn and Chiron.
I love how you bring the semi-squares in there.
I bring them. The subtle energies are so more interesting to me in some ways. So what we have with Saturn, first of all, Saturn and Chiron did this semi-square on February 23rd, while Saturn was still in Aquarius.
So last year.
We have this sort of passage at the end of February where the teacher and the healer are trying to do their work with us, but they're in a little bit of conflict. Right. One of the things that this does, I will say this is also a pace setting transit. Saturn is about our work in the world. And so if Saturn slows us down, it's on purpose. We don't like it. We rail against it. And we say, Saturn. But if Saturn and Chiron are working in this mild conflict energy, and we aren't moving as fast, or we think we're ready to go, but we need something to heal, or we're, it's all about our lessons and our healing being a little complex. And because the first one is already in our rearview mirror, your viewers can sort of consider, well, what was going on for me at the end of February, and know that right in the middle of August, like August 14th, and right at the end of November, around the 25th, give or take a week and a half or so on either side of those events, are the second and third hit of the only triple transit of the year, and the only one that's involving Saturn. And the next one that happens in August has Saturn in the new sign. And so you can learn a lot about your own experience of what Saturn in Pisces is going to bring you by just waiting till August comes and goes, and then think about what February was like, what was August like, see some of the differences in how you were approaching your lessons, and that might give a little clue as to what changed for you when Saturn moved into Pisces, because in August, that's where he'll be, semi-squaring Chiron, and also again at the end of November.
Which is interesting because I know we will have a Venus retrograde in Leo season.
Yep.
And then obviously we just had a Leo full moon as we record this episode. And so that's all bubbling and building up for that increase too, which is also, I mean, yeah, the fire signs, they basically are the fire of spirit inside of us, inside of our heart. And it is about being the cosmic child, being our own power, and also playing our own role, right, Leo? And so it's all, again, astrology just shows us the way. I love that.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much, honey. I always love talking to you. This is
Me
great.
too. I love it too. And we will see. We will keep each other up to date. Obviously, you can follow Michael wherever he wants to be found. Let us know where that could be.
Yes, michaellennox.com is my website, and you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and certainly michaellennox.com will show you where you can find me on those social media apps.
And I'm going to link everything, obviously, down below, because we both are here to guide you through the craziness and help you see that it's not that dramatic as we sometimes feel. So. All right. Thank you so much, Michael. We'll speak very soon.
It's a pleasure, always.
Bye-bye. Oops. Where is the stop button?